Let's begin with the ants themselves. When you see them appear in your home, your first instinct might be irritation, they're after sugar, crumbs, or some unnoticed spill in the corner. But if you pause, if you step beyond the surface of inconvenience, something deeper emerges. Ants are not random, they are organized, purposeful, and precise in their timing. They do not enter your home without reason. In the language of symbols, they are not just tiny insects, they are messengers of disorder. What does that mean? Disorder is not chaos for the sake of chaos. Disorder arises when boundaries collapse, when the natural flow of balance is interrupted. The home is meant to be a sanctuary, a space where your inner life can unfold without interference. When ants march through your walls, it is not simply the physical boundary that is being breached. It is also the energetic one, and this is why across cultures, their sudden presence is taken seriously. Because the home does not only protect your body, it protects your psyche. It holds your relationships, your sense of safety, your very identity. When the boundary is crossed, it signals that something in the unseen dimension has already begun to stir. Ants in this way represent persistence. They do not give up easily. Sweep them away, and they return. Block one path, and they will carve another. Their persistence mirrors the kind of negative forces that creep into our lives. Envy, resentment, ill intentions, or even unspoken hostility. These forces rarely announce themselves directly. They arrive silently, often unnoticed, until they are multiplying in corners of your life where you thought you were safe. And this is why ants are messengers. They reflect the persistence of energies that, if left unaddressed, can begin to eat away at your stability. But notice something else. Ants are small, almost insignificant, yet together, they have the power to dismantle something much larger than themselves. They remind us of a profound truth. It is rarely the giant, obvious threats that undo us. More often, it is the accumulation of small, ignored signals. A word you dismiss, attention you overlook, a pattern you excuse, until one day, you are surrounded. The ants teach us that nothing is too small to matter, and nothing insignificant when it repeats itself. So when they appear in your home, the invitation is not to panic, nor to brush it aside. It is to listen, to see them as a reflection of a deeper question. Where in my life are the boundaries becoming porous? Where am I ignoring the signs that something is feeding off my energy, my resources, or my peace of mind? Because ants are not just about the food in your kitchen. They are about the cracks in your walls, the places where intrusion has already found a way in. And here is the essential point. Signs are neutral until we assign them meaning. You can choose to see ants as only insects, and nothing will change. Or you can choose to see them as an alert, and suddenly you open the possibility of action, of reclaiming order before disorder grows too strong. The ants remind us that life whispers before it screams, that disturbances arrive first in small, almost invisible ways, asking us whether we are awake enough to notice. So the next time you see ants in your house, ask yourself not just, how do I get rid of them, but, what are they here to show me? Because if you are willing to see them as messengers, you will discover that even the smallest creature carries a warning that can protect you from much larger storms. The ants may be tiny, but their message is vast. Pay attention, because what you ignore today will decide the strength of your tomorrow. You said, expand key point 2 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key points. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Shi Heng Yi approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights shared. ChatGPT said, when you observe ants, you notice something striking. They never arrive alone. One ant on its own is almost meaningless, easily brushed aside, barely noticeable. But ants do not thrive in isolation. They thrive in numbers, in the power of the collective. Their strength lies not in the individual, but in the invasion. And when they enter your home, they rarely come as solitary wanderers. They come as a wave, a system, an organized force that overwhelms by sheer persistence. This is not random. In symbolic language, the appearance of ants as a group points to the nature of the energies they represent: witchcraft, envy, hostility. These forces often do not act alone either. They gather momentum through repetition, through collective intention, through patterns that reinforce themselves. Ants, therefore, are not just insects invading your space. They are mirrors of something larger. They show you how negativity operates silently, persistently, in numbers that overwhelm your defenses if you do not take them seriously. Think about how jealousy works. One envious glance may not affect you. One malicious thought directed at you may not penetrate. But repeated thoughts, repeated words, repeated actions, they accumulate. Just like ants build trails and colonies, toxic intentions build pathways into your life. They become stronger not by size but by quantity. And suddenly, what seemed too small to matter becomes too many to ignore. There is also a lesson here about attention. An ant's army appears because one scout found a crack. It discovered an opening or weakness and carried that information back to the colony. Very soon, the entire swarm follows the trail. What does that reveal to us? That one small vulnerability, left unguarded, can invite many forces in. It is not always the grand gestures of malice that undo us. Often, it is the unnoticed crack in the wall, an unresolved resentment, a broken boundary, a neglected discipline, that allows one intrusion to become an invasion. And so, when ants appear in your house, they do not simply show up to bother you with crumbs. They are showing you a picture of how energies in your life are working. Are you allowing negativity to multiply because you have left one corner unattended? Have you ignored a pattern that seemed small at first, only to discover it has gained momentum? The ants become a living metaphor for the truth that nothing in life grows in isolation. Neglect breeds multiplication, whether it is in the form of pests or in the form of unseen hostility. Now notice their movement. Ants march in lines, almost disciplined, as if obeying an invisible command. This discipline is their strength. And here lies another insight: forces that move against you, whether natural or spiritual, often arrive with order, not chaos. Their danger lies in their coordination. They do not need to be large to be effective, they only need to be united. The same principle applies in the spiritual realm. Negativity that is aligned, focused, and repeated becomes powerful enough to infiltrate even the strongest of homes if you do not recognize it. And this recognition is not meant to create fear. It is meant to awaken clarity. If darkness operates with unity, then how much more should light? If ants show you the discipline of negativity, then they are also teaching you the discipline required for protection. Just as their strength lies in numbers, so too does your strength lie in consistency. Consistent awareness, consistent boundaries, consistent action to safeguard your inner and outer space. So when you see ants arrive in armies, do not dismiss it as a random swarm. See it as a reflection of how forces gather, how persistence multiplies, and how small cracks can turn into open doors if left unchecked. Because the truth is simple: it is never the one ant that defeats you. It is the many you allowed to follow. And here is the message to carry with you: life is not undone by what happens once, but by what you permit to repeat. You said, expand key point 3 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key points. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Shi Heng Yi approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights shared. ChatGPT said, when ants appear in your house, you may think it's just nature doing what it always does. But if you take a closer look, you realize that in many traditions, their presence is never taken as a coincidence. It is seen as a sign, not of the ants themselves, but of a hidden hand behind them. What is invisible often reveals itself through the visible. The ants become evidence, a trace, a footprint of something larger moving in the unseen dimension. Why do cultures across the world associate sudden infestations with witchcraft, envy, or ill will? Because human beings have always understood that the physical world is not separate from the spiritual one. What happens in the realm of matter is often an echo of what is happening in the realm of energy. The ants are not the problem, they are the symptom. They are a signal that something has entered your field, something directed, intentional, perhaps even hostile. Witchcraft, at its core, is about interference. It is the deliberate attempt to shift the natural order of someone's life, to insert energy where it does not belong, to bend circumstances toward harm or imbalance. And like ants, it rarely announces itself loudly. It moves quietly, searching for cracks, waiting for opportunities, feeding on what is unprotected. So when ants suddenly appear where they never used to, especially in strange numbers or in unusual places, the question to ask is not just, where did they come from? But what unseen influence is moving through my space? This is where awareness becomes crucial. Too often we dismiss the small signs because they do not fit into the logical framework of modern thinking. We assume everything must have a rational explanation. And yes, rational explanations exist. Ants follow food, they build colonies, they sense chemical trails. But what we fail to see is that rational explanations and symbolic meaning are not mutually exclusive. Both can be true. Ants can be ants, and at the same time, they can be messengers of something you have overlooked. Consider how the mind works when under subtle attack. You feel restless in your own home. You sense irritation between family members for no clear reason. Finances slip, small arguments repeat, sleep becomes uneasy. None of these on their own feel like witchcraft or interference, but together they form a pattern, just like ants forming trails. The ants outside mirror the disorder inside, and this mirroring is exactly why so many traditions treat them as signs. The hidden hand reveals itself through what crawls across your floor. What makes this powerful is that it teaches us not to live blindly. Every interference leaves a trace. Nothing in life happens without leaving some kind of evidence. And if you learn to see the signs, you gain the power to respond before the interference grows stronger. Ignoring the ants may allow the hidden hand to continue unchallenged. Paying attention to them becomes the first step in reclaiming your ground. There is also a philosophical truth here. The world we see is always pointing us toward the world we don't see. The visible is the doorway to the invisible. When you train yourself to read the signs, not with paranoia, but with awareness, you begin to live in alignment with a deeper order of reality. You stop brushing aside what disturbs you as just random, and instead you recognize that even the smallest disruption may be carrying an invitation to act, to protect, to awaken. So the next time ants suddenly appear, do not only reach for poison or a broom. Pause and ask what hidden hand has set this in motion. What energy is trying to announce itself through these creatures? Because once you ask the question, you have already begun to break the cycle of blindness that interference depends on. The ants may walk silently, but their silence carries a message. What you see is never the whole story. Look deeper or you risk being ruled by what you refuse to notice. You said, expand key point 4 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key point. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Shi Heng Yi approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights shared. ChatGPT said, when ants appear in your home, what happens inside you? For many, it begins as irritation, a sudden discomfort at seeing the familiar space disrupted. But as you notice them crawling across the counter, invading cupboards, or appearing in places they shouldn't, irritation often shifts into unease. There is something unsettling about a swarm of small creatures moving with purpose where they don't belong. The discomfort is not only about hygiene or inconvenience. It is psychological. It touches a deeper layer of your mind, the one that equates safety with control. And ants, by their very nature, take away the feeling of control. This is why, across traditions, the presence of ants has been tied to witchcraft and hostile interference. Because witchcraft itself is not only about rituals performed in secret or curses spoken in anger. Its true power lies in its psychological impact. It enters through suggestion, through doubt, through the subtle erosion of your peace. When you start to feel restless in your own home, when your safe space begins to feel invaded, when your thoughts grow anxious without clear reason. This is the real battlefield. The ants crawling across your floor are external symbols of an inner disturbance that witchcraft aims to produce. Notice how the mind reacts. When you see ants, your attention narrows. You keep scanning the room, searching for more. You no longer rest fully because you expect movement in the corner of your eye. This constant vigilance mirrors what happens when negative energies or spiritual interference creep into your life. You become unsettled, unable to trust your environment, hyper alert even when no immediate threat exists. And this state of unease is precisely how interference weakens you, not through direct force, but through psychological erosion. This is why the presence of ants is so powerful as a sign. It doesn't only disturb your physical space, it disturbs your inner one. It pulls you out of comfort and into suspicion. Suddenly you wonder, why here? Why now? Why me? That questioning is not a weakness, it is awareness. But if it is left unmanaged, it can spiral into paranoia, into mistrust of yourself and those around you. And that is where witchcraft gains its foothold. not in the ants themselves, but in the way they train your mind to expect invasion, to live in unease, to lose trust in your own sense of safety. Think about this carefully. The home is not just walls and furniture. It is the place where your nervous system relaxes, where your relationships unfold, where you should recover from the demands of the outside world. If the home becomes infected with unease, you carry that unrest everywhere. Arguments ignite more easily, rest becomes shallow, finances feel unstable, and it is rarely because of the ants themselves. It is because of what their presence awakens in the human mind: anxiety, restlessness, the sense that something unseen is pressing against your boundaries. So the challenge is not only to remove the ants. The deeper challenge is to guard your mind against the erosion they symbolize. To remember that unease is a signal, not a prison. Yes, acknowledge the disturbance. Yes, investigate its possible source. But do not allow it to train your mind into fear. If the ants symbolize invasion, your response must symbolize clarity and strength, because what begins as a small external sign quickly becomes an internal war if you do not claim authority over your own state of being. And this is the core truth. Witchcraft and interference may attempt to unsettle your environment, but they succeed only if they unsettle you. The ants remind us that anxiety, restlessness, and distrust are the real battlegrounds. Guard your inner state as carefully as you guard your home, because the moment you reclaim your calm, the invasion loses its power. So when you see the ants, ask yourself not only, what is coming into my house, but also, what am I allowing into my mind? Because the strength of your protection does not begin at the door. It begins in the clarity of your thoughts. You said, expand key point 5 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key points. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Shi Heng Yi approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights. Share. ChatGPT said, when ants suddenly appear in your home, the easy response is to brush them aside, clean up the mess, and move on. And yet, the deeper truth is this: signs do not come to be ignored. They arrive to get your attention. They arrive because something within your environment, within your relationships, or within your energy has shifted. When you choose to dismiss them as nothing more than coincidence, you are silencing an alarm that was placed there for your protection. And alarms, when silenced, do not stop the fire from burning. They only stop you from knowing about it. This is the essence of why ants are treated as a spiritual warning in many traditions. They are not meant to terrify you, they are meant to wake you up. They tell you to pay attention to the subtle cracks in your defenses, to the corners of your life where disorder is beginning to gather strength. Ignoring them is not just negligence, it is an unconscious invitation for the very forces you would never willingly allow into your home. Think of it like this: life always sends messages in layers. At first, the signs are small: an unexpected argument, a restless night, ants appearing in places they never used to. If you pay attention, you catch the signal early, and you act. But if you brush it aside, the signals grow louder. Conflicts repeat, energy drains, your peace feels interrupted again and again. The pattern intensifies because the message has not been received. The ants that crawl across your floor are not just insects, they are part of a sequence, part of life's way of telling you something is pressing against your walls. Do not neglect this. And neglect has consequences. Many people wonder why misfortune seems to pile up without clear cause. They lose money unexpectedly, their health wavers, relationships strain, and yet they cannot find the root. Often, it is because they ignored the earlier whispers. They silenced the alarms. The ants appeared, the arguments grew, the unease deepened. But instead of asking what these things pointed toward, they closed their eyes. By the time they wake up to the pattern, the interference has already woven itself deeply into their lives. Philosophically, this is about responsibility. The world is not against you, but it is always speaking to you. It gives you signs, it nudges you, it whispers before it screams. And your responsibility is to remain awake, not paranoid but attentive. Attention is not fear, attention is power. It allows you to intercept what could harm you before it becomes too strong. Ants are a call to attention, nothing more, nothing less. But whether you heed the call determines whether the small disturbance remains small, or whether it multiplies into something far greater. So the question is not, are ants just insects or spiritual signs? The question is Am I awake enough to notice when life is trying to get my attention? Because if you are awake, if you are disciplined, if you treat the sign with respect, you place yourself in the position of power. You can investigate, cleanse, restore order, and strengthen the boundaries that have been tested. But if you dismiss it, you hand over your authority without realizing it. The ants, then, are not the danger. The true danger lies in your neglect, the habit of saying, "It's nothing, it doesn't matter, I'll deal with it later." This is what opens the door for greater disorder. Small signs, left unchecked, grow into large consequences. So the next time you see ants invading your space, do not merely see pests. See an invitation to sharpen your awareness, to protect what matters, to act before the small becomes overwhelming. Because the greatest loss is not caused by what we cannot control. It is caused by what we refuse to notice. You said, expand key point 6 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key points. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Shi Heng Yi approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights shared. ChatGPT said awareness is never meant to leave you standing still. Awareness is meant to move you. When ants appear in your home as a sign, they are not asking you to fear, they are asking you to act. Too often, people believe that noticing is enough. They recognize the disturbance, they sense the unease, they even admit something is not right. But then they stop there. Recognition without response is unfinished work. It is like seeing smoke rise from the corner of a room and deciding to do nothing about the fire. The sign has value only if it pushes you into action. And here lies the deeper wisdom. Action is not always dramatic. It does not always require grand rituals or loud displays of power. The most effective action often begins with quiet discipline. You notice the ants, you recognize the message, and then you ask yourself, what boundaries in my life need strengthening? Where am I leaking energy? What conversations am I avoiding? What habits have I neglected? Because witchcraft, negativity, and unseen hostility do not gain power through sudden explosions. They grow in the spaces where you remain passive, where you allow small cracks to remain open. Action begins by sealing those cracks. Philosophically, this is about reclaiming authorship of your own space. Your home is not just four walls, it is an extension of your inner world. Every corner reflects your state of being. To act means to cleanse, to reorder, to consciously declare that your environment is not available for invasion, not by ants, not by hostility, not by energy that does not belong. When you take even simple steps to reinforce order, you are doing far more than cleaning a house. You are sending a message, both to yourself and to the unseen world, that you are awake, that you are present, that you are not someone who ignores the signs given to you. But there is another layer. Action is not only about protecting space, it is about transforming fear into strength. If the ants symbolize persistence, then let your action symbolize resilience. If they show you how negativity works in numbers, then let your response show how clarity works in consistency. Every time you respond with awareness, every time you refuse to let small signs slip by unnoticed, you are training yourself to live differently. You are building an inner discipline that does not wait for crisis, but acts at the first whisper of imbalance. And this is what shifts everything. Because when you live with that kind of awareness joined with action, you no longer move through life as a victim of hidden forces. You stop fearing witchcraft, curses, or negativity, not because they do not exist, but because you understand that nothing unseen can control a person who refuses to live blindly. The ants may arrive, but they will not shake you, because you know what they mean and you know what to do. So the next time you see them, let that moment remind you signs are not punishments. They are opportunities. They are not here to scare you into paralysis. They are here to sharpen you into movement. The difference between fear and wisdom is whether you stop at awareness or carry it forward into action. And that is the final truth. It is never the presence of the ants that decides your fate, but the presence of your response. The sign is only the beginning. What happens next is up to you.